Good morning, everyone. It's a great day in my universe. We had a great day yesterday. I want to thank everybody who participated in the event. We had a great tour. I want to thank the guys at the farm. Did a great job. They even accommodated us with the live broadcast of the game out there at the farm. So that was great. Well, welcome to the Essential Elements for the Future of the San Joaquin Valley. I'm Joe Madden. No, I'm Frank Gornick. And it's my distinct pleasure to host our fifth policy series. Essential Elements is at its core a convergence of business, industry, education, and policymakers and stakeholders who share a passion for our valley. It's designed to stimulate actions and alliances, and the format is structured to build upon what we learn throughout the day and then hold us accountable tomorrow. Our series launched in 2014 with the very last drop, managing water and food production. As you know, water and food are arguably the most indispensable pillars of our state's economy. They are needed to be integrated, linked actions and alliances with greater coordination and accelerated implementation. And if you look at all the legislation that came out this past year, I guess that would be right on with that last statement. The series stimulated those alliances. Copies of all action reports are at your table and displayed in the registration area. In June, we turned our attention to energizing the valley with a focus on economic development, job creation, and workforce requirements for fossil fuels and renewable energy industries. In November, we hosted trading partners, export, evolution, logistics, and valley economic development, and we followed that with our Shifting Ground series in November of 2015. Numerous alliances and actions continued to be forged as a result of the first four Essential Elements series, and we are delighted to have played a role in brokering those alliances and actions. We've done our best to encourage various forms of communication, including a dedicated website that serves as your one-stop portal for all conference reports, PowerPoints, program content, actionable outcomes, and even numerous web-related articles and industry reports. We've used Twitter to spread our word, and you are invited to follow us at WHCCD Workforce. Planning this event is a shared experience. We're grateful to have your attendance, and we especially appreciate the Gualco Group, our premier series partner, led by Jack Gualco and his senior advisor Bob Gore. The group is instrumental in helping West Hills connect with policy-level executives in Sacramento and influence the type and mix of sessions. Jack and Bob, thank you. We are thankful for your continuing service to our district. I also want to just say one thing about our current governor. This has been a priority of a couple of administrations, but the current governor has really encouraged his key people to be involved in this conference over the past 4 years, and we've really appreciated that. We've had yesterday with Secretary Ross. She gave a great opening presentation about the issues that we needed to face, and she did it with a very upbeat, optimistic approach, which we really appreciated. We are also proud to include a wide range of partners and sponsors of our series. Many of them have been with us since the start of Essential Elements, and we've added a few more along the way. Their contributions and continuing efforts of our foundation, our colleges, and our district, we are extremely pleased to continue to underwrite the costs of the series. Essential Elements series partners include Chevron, the wonderful company, Harris Wolff, Central Motherlode Region Consortium, Jobs in the Economy, Doing What Matters, Central Valley Power Connect, and Recurrent Energy. Their partnerships is greatly appreciated. Let's give them a round of applause. I couldn't go on without recognizing some of our key staff here, and particularly the most key staff person that we have here, who has served us for 48 years on the Board of Trustees and has since retired, Ed Ivins. Edna, thank you for your service and continuing service to our board. It's also my pleasure to recognize Stu Van Horn. Stu is the kind of And Kathy, where's Kathy? Kathy's probably at the registration table, but they do a great job. Carlos as well. Appreciate your work. Thank you, Carlos. The continuing stewardship of our board is really essential to this. Their focus is on the relentless pursuit of student success. Our governing board has tremendous experience and drives our focus of innovations that help our students finish strong with their educational journey. I invite you to take a closer look at the select number of our board-driven initiatives we are highlighting in the poster gallery that we provided for you out in the lobby. So now let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Carrie Hammerstrom. During yesterday's events, I highlighted the invaluable role of Essential Elements series sponsors and contributors. Today's events are interconnected by a common theme of regionalization and collaboration. Leading many of the initiatives is a consortium of community colleges in the Central Valley that are members of the Central Mother Lode Regional Consortium. Boy, that's a mouthful. Carrie Hammerstrom is the chair of the consortium, where she works with the 14 community colleges and their career technical education deans and CTE programs on behalf of the California Community College Chancellor's Office to help propose, plan, develop, organize, implement, and coordinate projects and grants associated with the California Community College Chancellor's Office, doing what matters for jobs and the economy. The campaign is designed to engage community colleges in advancing regional prosperity by facilitating development and growth of CTE programs to meet the needs of regional businesses and industries. Carrie is a faculty member, has an extensive professional career history in both public and private sectors, and it is now my pleasure to ask her to provide her welcome as we launch our Essential Elements series focused on regional collaboration. Carrie, welcome. Error.
Thank you, Dr. Gornick. So welcome this morning. We're here really for the second part of the series is really trying to work together for regional collaboration. And we're here, one of the reasons for the strong workforce program and the workforce development we have mandates to work together. Many of us have been working those relationships before, but this helps us to begin to expand those and maybe to overlap those areas to make that tapestry brighter so that we can continue to be responsive to the workforce needs that are out there and to put students into jobs put them into educational pathways where there's jobs. We're working collaboratively really to make those things happen. And why work regionally? We have a lot of folks that maybe don't see the big picture, but when we work regionally, we learn things that we haven't learned before. We help to leverage those resources that are out there. We help to promote effective communication, and it helps us to be more responsive to the industry needs that are out there. So I encourage you as you're going through the day to kind of keep that kind of in your focus and to help us look for ways where we can coordinate with one another and really start to build some better programs out there and to be more effective in what we're doing and help get the word out there to students of the pathways that are out there that our community colleges offer in response to the strong workforce program initiatives and other initiatives that the Chancellor's Office is providing us some funding to do though. So thank you.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Jim Mayer. Jim has been I think at every one of our Essential Elements series. He is currently president and CEO of California Forward, a bipartisan public interest effort to bolster democracy and improve the performance of government in California. What a task. But he's up to it. Jim was part of a team that developed and launched California Forward in 2008. Previously, Jim was the founding executive director of the New California Network, a nonpartisan project to improve the state's fiscal decision-making, and executive director of the Little Hoover Commission, an independent and bipartisan state panel that reviews state programs and policies for efficiency and effectiveness. He's part of the Executive Planning Committee of the Essential Elements, and his guidance has been invaluable to us. Most importantly, Jim is a true advocate for the workforce training role of community colleges. His observations are always insightful, and we have plotted our path and course corrections through the involvement of the sage counsel of Jim. Please welcome Jim Mayer.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Chancellor Gornick. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to be working with West Hills and to find ways not just to advance what happens here in this region, but to connect it with state leaders and programs and policies. And I think it's a perfect example of some of the things that are working and gives us all some hope that we're going to be able to live up and solve some of the challenges that we've got. You know, I think as we concluded yesterday, before we had a chance to look at the score, the mantra was that we've got some big challenges, but that we're really up to it, right? That there is a real can-do spirit in all the regions, I have to tell you, in the state, but particularly unique and has its own flavor, and here in the San Joaquin Valley, and it's a huge asset that we'll talk a little bit more about today. And then to watch the Cubs do what they did last night, maybe that could be our mantra for today, because, you know, if the Cubbies can win the World Series, we can do whatever we want to here in the San Joaquin Valley. You know, you don't have to be a Cubs fan, you don't have to be a baseball fan, you don't even have to be a sports fan to love this idea about a team that was down 1-3, right? And then to come back from that, and then to get a lead in the seventh game and to lose your lead, right? And to be working from a tie and to get a rain delay. I mean, that takes a level of passion and persistence that shows you what we've got to do. And so I think it's all of this change, everything that's working is about those Californians that have passion and persistence. They're not going to give up until they're done. We're going to talk mostly a little bit here this morning about the California Economic Summit, but I want to provide just a little bit of context for that. As the Chancellor said, California Forward is a broader mission. We were chartered about 10 years ago at the request of some large foundations in California that realized that we were so gridlocked in Sacramento that however they were spending their money on early education or health or public health, that they couldn't expect the state to be even a reasonable partner in helping them advance their policy goals. And so we launched California Forward with this idea that we could create a vision, we could chart out what needed to happen, building off work that had been done before, to come up with some political reforms that would make the legislature a little bit more responsive, a little less prone to gridlock, a little bit more responsive to voters and citizens and residents, that we needed to really chart a path on how to manage money well. We'd gone through an entire business cycle in the state of California and had never once balanced the state budget, right? And you can't do that. You can't do that you couldn't continue to do what we were doing there. And literally, much of the tension in Sacramento wasn't just between D's and R's, or the Assembly and the Senate, or the legislature and the governor. It was between governments, right? Most people don't understand that the biggest lobby in government is government. Governments lobbying government. And in a state this big and this complex, when the governments are in conflict and they're not in concert, we're not getting anywhere. And so we went to work on that, and there's another discussion about all the things that we did in that area, but we started to make progress. And by we, I don't mean California Forward. We laid out that vision. We said, here's what needs to get done. And what we found was that there was all kinds of people that were willing to step up and do the piece that they thought was important. There's virtually nothing that California Forward has done that hasn't been in deep partnership, and oftentimes requiring other organizations or individuals to step forward and lead on that piece of the problem that they thought was most important, right? We sat in lots of meetings in those early days where everybody thought this was the silver bullet or that was the silver bullet, and they wanted to debate it. So we had to change the conversation. We said, it's not about silver bullets, it's about silver buckshot, and everybody's got a piece of the buckshot. Do what you can do, right? So again, I can talk later with any of you who are interested in that progress, in that story. We've made enough, by the way, over the last 10 years that we'll be celebrating 10 years, and particularly celebrating and contrasting some of what's happening in California versus at the national level and in other states in January. And Leon Panetta, who was our first founding co-chair, is going to be convening a set of leaders from across the country on what we can learn from each other in terms of creating state-based reforms that actually could change and impact the conversation that's happening in the nation's capital. And then that will be followed up by a celebration of our anniversary. So if anybody's been part of this and wants to know more about that, I'd be happy to give you some information about that. Now about the Economic Summit. It was about 2012. We certainly didn't feel like we'd solved the problems. In fact, there was a growing concern, mostly around regional organizations, civic and business organizations, that here we were 5 years into this quote-unquote economic recovery, but nobody felt like they were recovering. This was the flu that wouldn't go away. And they also felt like the state actually wasn't a very good partner on this. We had the Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation that for the first time developed an economic strategy for Los Angeles, right? Up until then, right, 150 years of European development, nobody had to figure out how to create a job in LA. But all of a sudden they realized they actually needed to deliberately think about what were the catalysts for job creation in Los Angeles. They came up with a very comprehensive strategy for what they were going to do, a 5-year strategy, and it didn't have one state action in it. And it didn't have one state action because they thought they were going to succeed. It had no state action because they didn't think it was worth getting on a Southwest airline and flying to LA or flying to Sacramento. And so we went to work to say, among the regions, what are your priorities? What are you trying to get done? And how do we then harmonize those and communicate it to the state and see if we can't start getting a dialogue going with state leaders about what they needed to do to either help with job creation or get out of the way. After we did 1 year of that, there was enough progress. You heard, if those of you who were here yesterday heard Glenda talking about her experience at that first summit, particularly around filling out that comprehensive agenda to include working landscapes as a part of the solution, as a part of the contribution to the state's economy. And everybody said, yeah, we want to do it. We want to keep doing this. This has got progress. So we've been going through this cycle. Every year we come together as a statewide summit. This year it'll be in Sacramento in December. I'll show you in a minute how you can register and participate in that. We have action teams, people that work between, this is an actual summit, this isn't a conference. People work between the summit to advance specific policies. We've got action teams that are looking at regulatory reform, that are looking at housing, that are looking at infrastructure finance and workforce development and access to capital. They've got some initiatives that turn into state policy, some initiatives that just turn into regional action. We've got a group of people in the Inland Empire that have been mapping out access to capital, to link up capital to entrepreneurs. And that was spawned and is supported through the Summit Network. So it's both hopefully strategic and well designed, but it's got this flavor of organic and leaders leading where they can that's just kind of fun to watch, and you can't control it even if you want to. And we don't try to. What we try to do at California Forward as the managing partner for all these regional organizations is literally just to coordinate smart thinkers who want to come in a room and solve a problem, right? They have passion and persistence somewhere in their hearts. They're Cubs fans. And so every year we come up with a roadmap for shared prosperity that I'll walk you through a little bit. But this year in particular, we're looking back at everything we've done, and what we want to do is, where do I point this? Do I point it at you? Okay, I'm pushing it, pushing. All right, there we go. This year in particular, what we're doing is looking at everything we've got going, and we're trying to come back to that core question, because as we were discussing yesterday, of all of the things we're most concerned about, it's us, right? It's us, our families, our neighborhoods, and our communities. And we know that we live in a state, and we live in a nation, and in fact, we live in a world with growing income inequality, with a reduction in upward mobility, and in many cases, an increase in the drivers of poverty. And so we've been doing some analysis with some folks from Stanford. We've been doing some analysis with folks at McKinsey that says, what are the drivers of upward mobility, and how do we make sure that what we're doing is everything we need to do? We may be doing 80% of the right things, but we need to do 90% of the right things. So how do we do that? And here's what the analysis shows. None of this should be new to you. Think of it all as a confirmation that the way you've organized your life and your work and your public service is right. Now the question is, how do we run farther, faster? And the first is we actually need pathways. People need the skills to get a quality jobs. You all know that. And we also know, because of the work people in this room, but I'll tell you, not everybody understands, that the economy has changed dramatically. You can no longer graduate from high school and expect to get a job that's going to keep you out of poverty. You need skills beyond that. That's a fundamental truth. You guys all understand it. Most Californians don't. And so that's been the whole work around workforce. That's been animating the work around the Strong Workforce Program, doing what matters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But it's kind of one of those truths that's got to be really important. The second is we actually need quality jobs. Now this, again, may sound incredibly obvious, but from my perch a block and a half away from the state capitol, there is not agreement. In fact, there is sometimes violent disagreement on the role of the state or even the responsibility of the state in terms of creating the conditions under which private capital can be invested to create jobs, right? We have this fight about, we fight about climate change and we fight about business climate, right? And what we're not understanding is what's the connection between our desire and our imperative to respond to climate change and our need to be honest and candid about business climate. And the political rhetoric clouds both of those conversations to a point where you got to get out of Sacramento. You got to come to places where you can see the sky like Coalinga to have this conversation. But what we found in some of this analysis that we've done, by the way, that there is a significant number of jobs that actually need to be created. There's jobs we have that we don't have quality labor to take into, and that's a skills gap, but there's more than that. And finally, we're not going to solve this problem without doing something about the cost of living. And we'll talk. And this I think is also important. We had more discussion in Sacramento this year about the cost of housing. A little bit got done, not nearly enough got done. But what was not explicit in that conversation, particularly among the highest leaders, was that if one of your priority concerns was upward mobility, if it was about poverty, we have got to fundamentally do something radical about housing production. Because housing costs in every single region, including the San Joaquin Valley, is going up at least 3 times wages. We will lose ground to poverty in a growing economy if we don't do something about housing. Think about that. We will lose ground to poverty in an expanding economy if we don't do something about the cost of living. And in the valley, more so than on the coast, that's not just housing. It's transportation because of people that commute to the coast, and it's the energy cost that makes it possible for us to live in the valley and be comfortable. So you guys understand that more than so. I mentioned to you that every year what we do through this summit is we refresh and we get commitments and to move forward on a roadmap to a shared prosperity. If this is available online at the Economic Summit website, it's got very specific actions that people have committed to work on. That's what's made this work. It isn't just people talking, it's people talking, committing, and acting. This last year, as we went into the summit last year this time in Ontario, we did one of our honest assessments, and we said, we're making a lot of progress, but we're not in any danger of solving the problems that confront us, right? And we started thinking about the size of our problems. And we actually did some analysis, and we said, well, we know we need 1 million more skilled workers over the next decade. We need 1 million more bachelor degrees, engineers and healthcare professionals and others, but we need 1 million more skilled workers. Every year before the drought, we were using 10 million acre-feet more of water in California that the system could sustainably provide. 10 million acre-feet on the average year, according to the Department of Water Resources. So, and that's with normal rainfall. So what are we going to do over the course of a decade to reuse, recycle, conserve, store, whatever it's going to take to add 1 million acre-feet to that supply, right? And we needed 1 million more homes. Now, it turns out when we did the analysis, that was the estimate from the California Housing Consortium. It turns out we need a whole lot more than those. So that became our roadmap, and we worked on it. And there was a couple of things that's really important to recognize about this effort, because it's modeled in this room, and this is what we're trying to do. This petri dish we're trying to take up to the great big laboratory in the Capitol is that it's cross-sectoral. We don't get there unless we've got public, private, and civic sector leaders working together. And we don't get there unless we're grounded in the regions, because the needs of the regions are different than the region of the state. We've got to find a way to understand what each of the regions need, harmonize that, and navigate that into state policy and practice. And then there's this idea up here that should have probably been the bottom bullet, which was over this time, this group of leaders, this diverse, eclectic group of committed leaders, explicitly started talking about the objectives of a triple bottom line. So for those of you who are not familiar with the triple bottom line, we all know that business gets effective because they're focused on the bottom line, right? Revenue has to exceed expenditures. You got to be more efficient over time. You can't lose market share. Well, that's one bottom line. The other bottom line is, are we actually doing this in a way that restores upward mobility and reduces poverty, that creates more economic opportunity? That was the California dream, right? You came here to get better than you could get someplace else. And if that's no longer true for most of us, for many of us, then we haven't been good stewards of that dream. And the third is that we do need environmental protections, and we have been leaders in environmental protections, and we have to continue to be leaders in environmental protections, but we have to be smarter about that. So that triple bottom line is, how do we advance policy that simultaneously advances all three of those objectives? We're not going to trade one over the other. If we pass a policy that says environment first, that's a failure in the eyes of the summit. If we pass one that says profits first, that's one that is a failure in the eyes of the summit. If we pass one that is only about social equity without understanding economic sustainability of business, that's a failure in the eyes of the summit. So I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes on each of those 3 million challenges. We're going to talk more on our next panel about workforce, so I don't want to give too much away here. But when we think about what's working and what is required, this is more than more money and more programs and more classes. If we want a strong workforce, we must develop very durable regional partnerships, right? And the Strong Workforce Program, which is one work product that the Summit helped contribute to, both in terms of its design, its enactment, and now its implementation, is designed to build durable partnerships. It's $200 million more down to the community colleges for CTE, but it's also got some significant elements of reform in it. The money isn't allocated on a per capita basis. It's based on a formula of where is it needed and who's got the capacity to solve the problem. It requires regional collaboration between business and civic leaders and college leaders. There's some places where that's natural and it's been happening for years, and this is a good example of that. This is the kind of thing that we could point to. West Hills was one of the places you pointed to when you were trying to explain this to the Department of Finance. But it's not so natural in every region of the state. And it also is designed not to be one more silo, one more program, but a way to integrate the various silos and the various programs. So lots of great design went into doing this. And so the other thing that I think you need to understand is whether it's the Strong Workforce Program, whether it's the additional money that came into the adult schools, whether it's career pathways or linked learning, the view from the Capitol is they've put a lot of money into this workforce issue, into CTE. I was at a smaller conversation with the legislative analyst Mac Taylor last week, and I engaged him on his view on the progress we were making on Strong Workforce, and his immediate response was, we gave them a lot of money, let's see what they can do with it. That makes me nervous because that means when the recession comes, not if, but when, and when they need to start cutting money out of the budget, the tradition is we take the first money to come out of the budget is the last money that went into the budget, and this was some of the last money, and we've got to be prepared to show that this is the money we should actually be doubling down on in a recession, not cutting. So that's the challenge for us at a regional level, isn't just to be able to do it effectively, but to be able to demonstrate its impact. And so effective implementation will be everything. You know, I want to say one other thing about the Strong Workforce Program, and we can talk about this more at the panel if it's of interest to you. That wasn't an accident. That was incredibly well engineered by a brilliant internal champion in Sacramento who built partnerships internally and externally in order to create a program that could make a difference. And so sometimes those of us outside of government, particularly those that have had positions whose job it is to criticize government, it's hard to miss when we see innovation and brilliance and dedication all line up and have it be resultful. In addition to the work that was, the progress that was being made around $50 million in one-time funding and elsewhere, when it became clear they needed to do something, they created a task force. It was balanced internal and external stakeholders. We all were involved in that for 6 months. We developed 26 comprehensive recommendations that were unanimously adopted by, among others, the Chamber of Commerce, the California Chamber of Commerce, and the Academic Senate, unanimously adopted. And all of those within 6 months were within legislation and sponsored by the governor. That's the kind of clear thinking, strategic thinking that we need to do if we're going to make a difference on this, and it demonstrates that we can do it. But pathways aren't enough, as I said. We're going to have to do much more than just pathways. We're going to have to create some jobs. Now, we focused on water. Now, this is obviously a big, huge issue in this part of the state. The first few years of the summit, this was really about infrastructure investment, but we doubled down on water for a couple of reasons. One was because of the priority that it had in terms of drought and climate change and resiliency and even equity for the communities that weren't having clean, drinkable water that, as we demonstrated yesterday in some of those charts from the Water Board. If you looked at the water side, it was also where we really needed to innovate at a regional scale. So it was the regional organizations really gravitated to this. This was a place where they no longer wanted to wait on a state solution. They wanted to figure out, to the extent they could, how could they solve it. And even if the state could get its act together, it wasn't going to be enough for them to solve their problems. And so one of the things we've been doing in the last year in particular is we've been working with Glenda Humiston and her folks at UCANR. Last week we had 50 of the smartest innovators in water that you can imagine, both people on the academic side, the research side, the innovation side, the district side, and we asked them to look through what more needs to happen so that the state could either support or get out of the way of innovation. And it was all focused on one particular set of activities around recharge because it has such a ubiquitous thing. So from that lens, what could we do do? What does the state need to do to help her get out of the way for recharge? What would it do? And there's a couple of things that, even for the non-water people here, I think it's instructive. The first is we had made a lot of progress in this state around integrated regional water management planning. The state had been giving out a little bit of money and saying to people, talk to each other, collaborate, figure this out, right? We don't have flood control and water supply and water quality projects. We need projects that do all three of those things. This isn't about protecting the environment or providing for people. This was projects that could do both. And a lot of the regions then went down that line. We all came up with integrated regional water management plans. Many of us came up with a couple of them. We got a little bit of grant money to start doing that, and then the legislature passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which says thou shalt not. So the state went from encouraging the kind of behavior it wanting to setting up a framework that said, here's what you got to stop doing. And that's not to say that wasn't vitally important, and I've been involved in my own region about how to implement that. But what it's done, and this is what was validated by these people in the room that had been working on integrated work, is it shifted all of the energy away from how do we innovate and get the job done to what kind of framework do we do so we can tell people when to turn off their pumps. And the wisdom in that room was these are not incompatible. They have to be pursued simultaneously. And the very best alignment will be when we have plans that say what we need to do when things get really bad, and then we have strategies and projects that make sure we never have to use those. Now, in the San Joaquin Valley, your situation is more acute, as you know, than anywhere else in the state, and it may be much, much harder for you to implement that than it will be in Sonoma or the Sacramento Valley or the Santa Ana River. But those are all places where they are doing that, and it's showing what can and needs to be done, that they need to tailor their governance and their finance and their regulations to the plans, and they need help from the state in order to get that done. And what we've made some progress with creating some financing tools. I really think it was really pretty interesting when we had them prioritize the barriers. For those of you who were here yesterday, you wouldn't be surprised. Regulations came up as the #1 barrier. It wasn't money, right? It wasn't getting people to work together. It wasn't designing projects that could have multiple benefits. It was that the regulatory scheme was so complex and uncertain, and this is government regulating government. This isn't government regulating farmers or the oil industry. This is government regulating government is so onerous that it's in the way of the innovators. So how do we have to address that issue? And I just found that really profound, right? That this isn't about, we had this great conversation yesterday about how noble and important it is, and people go into that field, whether you're Darren at the Water Board or whether you're Brian at DPR, people go into that business doing the public good, the social good. We need them there. We need them to be strong. We need them to be creative. We need to support them. We need them to be innovators. We need Darren to be able to go home for Christmas, and if he can, he can come to my house. But the bottom line is that doesn't mean that what we're doing is nearly good enough. It's about achieving what we want to with the regulations, not preserving the regulations. And the third big area is around housing. And again, this is a huge issue in the Bay Area. And because it's a huge issue in the Bay Area, it's a huge issue in the northern San Joaquin Valley and becoming a bigger one. We worked over the last few months. One of my board chairs used to be a senior partner at McKinsey, so people will know them. They're this global smartest people in the universe. They don't call themselves that, but I do, having worked with them a few times. We got them to do an analysis of the housing situation in California. It's incredibly detailed. It's incredibly analytic. We asked them to document the size of the problem, document the consequences, and tell us of all of the kinds of ideas we're thinking about, which would actually get us near where we have to be. Well, the first thing they pointed out is they came back and said, you don't have a 1 million home challenge, you have a 3.5 million home deficit. That if everybody who needs and wants a new home over the next decade has one, you'd need to create 3.5. That would require us to quadruple the housing production in the state of California from last year. And the other part is that while it's really acute in Google land, it's important in every single region. Here in the San Joaquin Valley, 357,000 households pay too much for their housing. Now that may just sound like a luxury. Wouldn't it be nice? Don't we all want our rent or our mortgage payment to go down? But these are people that are paying above that 33% threshold that you really can't succeed. You can't exceed if you're going to put food on the table, money in the savings account, money in the kid's college account, pay your premium on the health care. So this is about more in order to meet your other necessities. That gap in the San Joaquin Valley comes to $1 billion a year. That's $1 billion a year that people are paying on rent that they could be paying on education or on healthcare, right? Or putting away for their own retirement. So that's the gap. It's huge. They also said statewide, I couldn't pull regional numbers out. I think they can if I could get them to for the San Joaquin Valley, that there's a $70 billion annual cost each year to the state of California by not building those additional homes. Those are jobs lost in construction, infrastructure development, and everything else. Think of it. Think about adding $70 billion to the trillion-dollar economy of California. Again, coming back, not just because it's a nice parallel to our organizational paradigm around regions, but every region does have a different problem. The McKinsey studies took a long, hard look at Fresno. So those of you who commute from one side of the valley to the other, Fresno's done what everybody thinks is the right things to do about trying to rezone land that is near vacant or underused in the urban core in order to drive infill development and multifamily development closer to services within the infrastructure footprint. But they too are now still having challenges attracting private dollars to build those houses. So there's no easy answers, but it's about tailoring those and understanding what they're trying to do. And if we can solve this problem, as I want to suggest to you in the McKinsey report, we solve many, many more. That this is a competitive disadvantage for companies that are trying to get people to work here, and it's not just in Silicon Valley. State agencies are having this problem. I was talking to one yesterday that we do work with that said high cost of housing in Sacramento, believe it or not, had squandered 2 efforts to bring good tech people into a state agency, and this idea about how much money is freed. What the summit is doing on this is we've had all of the major stakeholders around the table for 6 months. Trying to develop an all-of-the-above strategy that would say, back to our themes, how does the state help or get out of the way? And the way it can help is provide some financial incentives to communities where affordable housing and workforce housing doesn't pencil out. They literally can't afford it and assume that they can fund the fire department to show up if something goes wrong. And the second is we've got to clear the regulatory thicket. Some of that is at a state level around CEQA and other decisions, but a lot of them are local. Most of the regulator levels are at city councils and county boards of supervisors. So how do we create financial incentives and regulatory incentives for people to say yes to housing, not no to housing, to make it pencil out near the right place? McKinsey's done a great job of it. So that's our agenda. You can see how we're trying to, between each of these, identify the highest priorities, ground what we're doing in solid analytics, the best thinking and innovation in the regions, and then communicate to the state what they need to do. Last year in Ontario, the State Assembly Jobs and Economic Development Committee came to the hearing and did a hearing. Came to the summit and did a hearing, right? What is coming out of the summit that we need to do? They look to the summit now to set their agenda. Many of the cabinet secretaries come to our working sessions on the first day of the summit. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create that dialogue. And again, the work that's been done here at the Essential Elements has modeled that kind of behavior. When people from Sacramento will drive all the way to Coalinga, we ought to be able to get them all the way over to the convention center. And that's what we're going to try to do on December 13th and 14th. So then to capstone this off, it's important then to step back because there's something else that is happening here in the Valley that is happening in other parts of the state, but you ought to recognize the progress you're making on this. You ought to be explicit around it, deliberate around it, and candidly celebrate it. And this is not a job for leadership. This is a job for stewardship. And I want to, that's not to say that leadership isn't important. Leadership is critical. But leadership is about getting things done, and stewardship is about getting it done in the right way. And that's, I want to go to just a couple of things that I want to share with you. You can see this is why I went to the trouble of preparing all these notes, so I would ignore them. This, in some ways, this sounds obvious because yesterday we talked about how do we come up with the leadership to do this. And again, I think of leadership as the engine, and I think of stewardship as the navigation. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're building that political will to not just solve the problem, say like they solved the minimum wage or overtime for ag, but to solve it in a way that would have been a triple bottom line solution. It's not to say there won't be value to either of those, but as we just heard in the testimony of people that are trying to provide those jobs and trying to feed the world, it didn't feel like a solution to them. So back to our triple bottom line mantra, how do we do this in ways where it does, where the adversaries cooperate, right? This isn't about getting to 41 votes in the assembly or 3 votes at the county supervisors. It's about building that strong coalition, civic, private sector, and public sector, to understand what needs to be done and build out those durable solutions. I don't expect breakthroughs at Sacramento. They don't happen very often, and when they do, they're almost always preceded by breakthroughs at the community and regional level. So in some ways, the most important thing you can do to help the state is help your community and help your region. And what we can try to do through the summit collectively is lift those up as both examples and draft language. A lot of this is going to be about motivation of the individuals involved. This is about putting community interest above individual interest. We need business and employers in the room, and they're going to come because they've been struggling with their bottom lines. But what we heard from Mr. Cameron yesterday was that he doesn't go to these meetings just as an employer. He goes to them as a community member. He's not just thinking about his employer, he's thinking about his employer's families. He's not just thinking about this annual year, he's thinking about the long-term viability of his enterprise. And the other stakeholders need to do the same, right? In labor union settings, we need labor leaders coming together, not thinking about how they're going to get their dues this year or their election within their membership. They need to be thinking about the viability of the employers. And because that's what jobs are. They need to move from, can we get that job and make it union? Can we make more employers viable, and what does that mean? And that's hard to start with the folks that are most adversarial. The war, we don't have everybody involved in the Economic Summit. We struggle to get labor there, to be real candid. We had some breakthroughs this year around workforce. We had SEIU United Healthcare Workers, the people that are trying to grow all of those jobs we need in healthcare, that actually sat side by side at the Department of Finance with the California Economic Summit to talk about the importance of modifying the academic Senate rules to require a committee for curriculum approval for career technical education. That idea didn't come from the academic Senate. It came from another labor organization. And it made a pretty compelling argument to finance that this was about balancing interests in favor of the long-term interest. So we're making some progress on that, and I share that with you to encourage those kinds of innovations. There's some prerequisites to this idea of stewardship. It requires candor and honesty and respect and trust. And those are far less current, those are not the currency of the capital. We can make it the currency of the capital, but I think only if it's the Bitcoin of the San Joaquin Valley first. And so that's what you have all started. I think if you reflect back on the places where you've made the most progress, the places where you want to put your energy, the places where we need to double down, it's where we've got those relationships that are premised on candor and honesty and respect and trust. What are the characteristics of some of these solutions? All of them are compromises. And this doesn't mean compromised meaning weakened. This means compromises where you understand the different perspectives and you take the most valuable, the most valued elements of each side. I've always worked in a bipartisan setting. I was really proud that on virtually every set of analysis that came out of the Little Hoover Commission, it went out unanimously with strong Democrat and Republican support, including members from both houses, both parties, and people appointed by both parties. I used to tell them if they were going to divide on party lines, they needed to back up, take a breath, and wait until they could move forward on something that they were united about, because the legislature could disagree all by itself. And that's what I think we can commit ourselves to in the regions. If we can show a united front that's around principled compromises that takes the best of both, then we've got something. And it requires this commitment to action. We hold ourselves to, this is way too much work. And the wine at these events is not that good. If we're not going to adequately make progress on this, we should all go do something else. And that's our kind of daily mantra in the Economic Summit. We're going to do this, and partners are going to come partner with us, and we're going to make the most difference because it is the most valuable way of accomplishing the shared vision that we have. So I'm grateful for the time to share that with you. I tried to put that out as some ideas that could inform, animate, encourage you to pursue your own work, whether or not you ever get involved in the Economic Summit or not. But of course, I hope you do get involved in the Economic Summit. The Economic Summit is a group of individuals that refuse to accept the status quo, and they want to promote a way of making decisions that are better than they've been made in the past. We're looking for answers. And maybe just kind of one final example to kind of show where I think we go in the future on this. In all of this discussion about regulations yesterday, there is so much we could do to integrate and to innovate around regulations that we're not yet even framing or advancing in the right way. Secretary Ross yesterday talked about California grown, and what California grown means is that it's not just made in California, but made to California forward standards. Well, if you go to californiangrowin.org, it doesn't actually say that. It's got really beautiful, wonderful stories about family farmers. And it's not communicating, and not suggesting that's the place, but I think we need to communicate that, in fact, if you're buying product from California, it is safe. It is, the workers were respected and got reasonable paid, and we're trying to manage our environment so that it's healthier than we incorporated it. And I think we need to communicate that, but I think we need to do something much more. If we want our regulatory framework to be a competitive advantage, it isn't just about the high quality. It's got to be about efficiency. It can't simultaneously be a competitive disadvantage. And that means that we've got to have as much innovation in the public sector as we have in the private sector, and that's only going to happen through a collaborative environment. So we have to approach what is oftentimes an adversarial regulatory environment with a new framework, public, private, and civic, trying to figure out how to innovate and to integrate those regulatory frameworks. I was listening again to Mr. Cameron yesterday, and I said, well, we actually do integrate regulatory framework. He integrates it, right? Water Board does its rules, DPR does its rules, Food and Ag does its rules, and it's up to the grower to integrate all of those things, whether they conflict, whether they're confusing, whether they're not understandable. That's not anybody's problem in the Capitol. That's the user's problem. That's the consumer. That's the producer's problem. We've got to reverse that. That's the state's responsibility to speak with one voice. And we've got to help Darren and Brian and others get that done. It's not up to them to do it, it's up to us to do it. And I think we can really do that. And I would hope that as this series progresses, having teed that up, the region can be a place where we start to really advance this idea of efficient and integrated regulatory frameworks that are competitive advantages, not just for what they deliver, but how efficiently they deliver them. And I think you could do that in the kinds of spirit and value of what I've laid out for you here this morning. And I would strongly encourage you to go to caeconomy.org and register and participate in the summit. It's not a spectator sport. The California dream requires us to stay passionate and persistent and not give up, even through rain delays, although we'd love a few of those, wouldn't we? Okay, thank you very much.
Jim, just a little reflection before we break here, but in that slide with respect to stewardship, the ones that came across for me yesterday and listening to some of the farmers and the frustration was the issue of respect and trust. Somehow that's also got to be flipped. So the only way it's flipped is in the conversations that we had yesterday, where people begin to understand or hear the frustration about how do I weave myself and my operation through these guidelines that you guys have created, but you're not giving me any help to solve them. And that's kind of the mantra of today's, that we'll carry forward today, is to make sure we have those kind of candid conversations about the things that are the obstacles that we're facing in terms of achieving our goals here. So with that, we'll take a short break and begin to convene our panel. Thank you.